My girlfriend invited her ex to move into our house without even asking me, so I decided to leave and cut her off. I'm 31, and my girlfriend, Jenny, is 29. We'd been together for 2 years, and things were getting pretty serious, or so I thought. Overall, I believed we had a good thing going. Sure, Jenny had some quirks, and she had a history of staying close with her exes. She'd always tell me, they're just part of my past, nothing more, and I tried my best to respect that. I'm not the type of guy to dictate who my girlfriend can or can't be friends with. But there was one ex, Mike, who came up a bit too often for my liking. They dated for a couple of years, even lived together, and while it sometimes made me uncomfortable, I brushed it off. I'd met him once at a party Jenny threw. She introduced him as an old friend, but it was painfully obvious to everyone there that he was her ex, the guy she once shared a life with. He was in a band, seemed like he hadn't moved forward in life, unlike Jenny, who had. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. That was until things started to take a strange turn. It began when Mike showed up at our place unannounced. It was a Sunday. I'd gone out for a jog, and when I returned, there he was, casually leaning against the door and smoking, like he belonged there. He looked so at ease, almost as if he'd just walked out of our kitchen. Jenny swooped in, quick to introduce him, brushing it off with a casual, "Oh, he just stopped by. He's going through a rough time." Felt odd, but I didn't want to overreact. I laughed it off, gave him a polite nod, and let it go. But after that, Mike started showing up more and more. Rough times became his new thing. He'd appear looking like some lost puppy, just needing a friend. Jenny would make him coffee, sit with him in the kitchen, and listen as he poured out his woes, how his band had split up, how he was behind on rent. The way he looked at me, you'd think I was the intruder in his personal therapy session with Jenny. She'd pat his arm, assuring him it'd all be okay, as if he were somehow her responsibility. I didn't love it, but I tried to stay understanding. Then came the night Jenny dropped a bombshell. We were winding down, watching a movie, when her phone buzzed. I recognized the look on her face. It was him. She sighed, apologized, and walked out of the room to take the call. Though she shut the door, I could still make out parts of the conversation. Her saying things like, "You'll figure it out," and his voice cracking in response. About 20 minutes later, she returned, visibly upset. "Mike lost his apartment," she announced, sitting down next to me. I already knew what was coming. "I was thinking," she began, avoiding eye contact, "he could stay here for a few weeks, just until he finds a place." I stared at her, hoping she was joking. "Jenny, he's your ex, are you serious?" She frowned, clearly frustrated. "He's got nowhere else to go. He's my friend. Why are you acting like this?" "Because this is our home," I replied firmly. "I don't want some guy you used to date living here." Her expression turned hurt. "Mike and I are just friends. I told you that from the beginning. You're overreacting." Things escalated fast from there. Jenny tried to paint herself as someone who simply had no choice but to help a friend in need. She tossed out every excuse, saying I didn't understand her need to help people. I pointed out that this wasn't just a friend. This was her ex, someone who'd been showing up repeatedly, treating our place like his second home. Still, she refused to see my side of it. Then she hit me with, "Maybe you should take a few days to think about it," as if I was the unreasonable one. I decided I needed some space. I packed a bag and went to crash at my buddy Tom's place, thinking time apart might help us both cool off. But even there, I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling. Here I was, the one forced out of my own house, while her ex was seemingly settling in. Was I losing my mind here? The next morning, I returned home, ready to have a calm discussion and sort things out. But when I walked into the living room, I was met with a scene that made my blood boil. Mike was stretched out on our couch, holding my coffee mug, looking completely at home. He acted like he'd been there for weeks. Jenny glanced at me, almost defiant, like she was daring me to say something. "So, when did this happen?" I asked, gesturing toward him on the couch. She shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "Mike needed somewhere to crash last night. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured wrong," I snapped. "Jenny, this is our home, not a hotel for your exes." What exactly am I here for? Her arms crossed defensively. It was just one night, she shot back. Why are you being so insecure? Insecure? I repeated, incredulous. Jenny, this isn't about insecurity. It's about respect. Something you clearly don't have for me. Mike, meanwhile, just sat there, watching the argument unfold like it was some sort of live entertainment. He looked more amused than anything. Jenny didn't back down. In fact, she took it further, saying, if you can't accept me helping people, maybe we're not right for each other. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I'd fallen in love with was choosing her ex's rough times over our relationship. Without another word, I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my duffel bag, and started packing. Jenny tried protesting, saying I was overreacting, but I wasn't sticking around to argue anymore. I didn't want to keep fighting about it anymore. I needed to get out. As I was walking away, Jenny grabbed my arm, her tone softening. Don't you love me? She asked. Don't you want to see if we can work this out? I gently moved her hand off me and replied, I do love you, but not more than I respect myself. The following days were tough. She called and texted nonstop, flipping between apologizing and defending her actions. Sometimes she accused me of being controlling or claimed I didn't understand her need to help others. It wore me down, but eventually I just blocked her. I knew that if I kept engaging, I'd get pulled back into the same messy cycle. Once I put some distance between us, everything about our relationship became much clearer. I realized Mike's constant appearances and her unwillingness to set boundaries were part of a larger pattern I'd ignored for too long. This wasn't just about him needing a place to crash. It was about her consistently pushing limits, disregarding my feelings, and treating everything that was mine as if it were hers. Started small. She'd borrow things, hoodies, books, even my cologne. At first, I didn't mind. But then there was one week when I couldn't find my favorite leather jacket. I searched everywhere, only to see her post photos on Instagram wearing it. When I confronted her about it, she dismissed me with, it's just a jacket. Why are you being so possessive? That attitude wasn't new, it was a recurring pattern. She treated my belongings like communal property, never asking, just taking. It was as if everything of mine was merely an extension of her own things. Even after I left, she messaged me asking if Mike could borrow some of my clothes, just for a little while. That was when it hit me. She had never respected boundaries to begin with. Another issue was the emotional demands she constantly placed on me. No matter what I was doing, if she needed me, nothing else mattered. Whether I was working or spending time with friends, she expected me to drop everything. One night, for example, it was my brother's birthday. She called out of nowhere, saying she was having a rough day and needed me immediately. I explained that I was at a family event and promised to call her later. But she guilt-tripped me, saying, I thought I was a priority. The rest of the week, she acted distant, and I ended up feeling like I was in the wrong for not abandoning my family to cater to her. After we broke up, she kept trying to drag me back into that same emotional loop. She'd call and text, saying we needed to talk things through, but by then, I understood that her so-called need for support was really just a way to maintain control over me. It wasn't that I didn't care about her struggles. I did. But this time, I knew I had to prioritize my own well-being. Then there was the time Mike tried to turn our home into his band's rehearsal space. One evening, he casually mentioned that he'd been kicked out of his studio and started dropping hints about needing a place to practice. Jenny was all for it, saying it would be so nice to help him out. I shut that down immediately. The last thing I need is my house turning into a rehearsal spot for your ex's band. I told her bluntly. Mike tried to guilt-trip me, saying, Jenny said you were cool. I shot back, this isn't about being cool. It's about boundaries. Jenny, of course, pushed back, calling me uptight and claiming I didn't understand her desire to help others. But by then, it was crystal clear. She didn't care about respecting my boundaries, especially when it came to Mike. She twisted everything I said into me being selfish or unsupportive. To her, setting boundaries was some kind of moral failure on my part. Meanwhile, Mike just sat in the background, soaking up all the sympathy and acting like I was the unreasonable one. So, when I walked into the living room that last time and found him sitting on my couch, drinking coffee from my mug like he owned the place. It was the final straw. In that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't about Jenny being a good person helping a friend in need. This was about her self-righteous need to play the hero, even at the expense of our relationship and my dignity. Honestly, I began to wonder if she kept Mike around just to hold some kind of power over me, or maybe even over him. Walking out wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't let her manipulate me into thinking I was wrong for needing respect. This time I left for good with no intention of coming back. She tried to call, spinning it as though I'd abandoned her over a small misunderstanding, but it was far beyond that. I was done being her doormat and letting her turn my life into a soap opera of her exes and emotional whims. It's been a few months now, and I haven't looked back. I've come to realize just how blind I'd been to all the ways she ignored my boundaries and undermined my self-respect for her own convenience. I blocked her on everything, stopped checking mutual friends' social media, and focused on myself instead. Life's been a lot quieter, much less chaotic, and honestly, it's been a relief. If I've learned anything, it's that respect isn't negotiable. You can't build a meaningful relationship with someone who won't respect your boundaries and expects you to sacrifice your dignity for their convenience. Thanks so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Please leave a comment. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.